Hey everybody, Coach Brew here, best-selling author of the book Stadium Status, taking your business to the big time. And today on Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, we're going to be talking about marketing secrets from Taylor Swift, how and why getting fired on your birthday can actually be a great present, and also leadership authenticity and why everything you do needs to be congruent. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to look at what is at the cutting edge of leadership, and can you learn from country music stars and pro athletes when it comes to leadership? Maybe you can. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 listeners globally. And we're also very grateful to have been cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everyone that you know. Listen, there are over 1 million podcasts out there, literally thousands of them focused on business or leadership, but there's only one show that focuses on what's at the heart and the soul of business and leadership. And you're tuned into it right now with me, your host, Dov Baron. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you know that in today's world of business, thinking big has a whole different meaning than it once did. Now we're all doing business on a global level, and business as usual just won't cut it. But how do you go from being the equivalent of an unknown musician playing small local gigs to being a superstar with stadium status in the world of business? And is there, in fact, a lot you could learn about business today by examining how star athletes and superstar musicians get to stadium status? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest today is John Brubaker. He is a nationally renowned performance consultant, speaker, award-winning author. Using multidisciplinary approaches, John helps organizations and individuals develop their competitive edge. He teaches his audiences how to obtain better results in business with straightforward tools that turbocharge performance. His latest book is in fact entitled Stadium Status, Taking Your Business to the Big Time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Coach John Brubaker. And the crowd goes wild. The whole stadium is on their feet, John. The whole stadium.
There you have it, my friend. Great to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. Thank you for joining us. So let's jump right in. Stadium status, what does that mean? Of course, we all picture a stadium and a bunch of people in it, but what does it mean in the context of leadership and business?
Great question. I think stadium status is something that lies within all of us. The term originated with musicians. You know, Kanye West would tell you that he invented it, but technically I believe
Really?
Rihanna invented the term.
Oh, really?
And it simply means being big enough that you're being a big enough act or brand that you could fill, the largest of stadiums. A lot of acts go from, performing local shows to theaters, amphitheaters, arenas, and then to be able to sell out a stadium is kind of, that's everyone's ultimate dream. And I think it's a great metaphor for the business owner.
Absolutely.
We all have a desire to be known or to have our brand be known, outside of our own backyard and to reach some sort of stadium status ourselves.
Now, that's interesting, and we want to look at where that goes and what that means to us in business. But I want to go back a little bit into you, because
Sure.
every man and his dog today claims to be a coach, but you actually were a coach in the world of athletics. So tell us about how you got started in that, and now you're talking about stadium status with business people. This is an interesting leap, it would appear.
Sure. Yeah, I will go all the way back to when I was in grad school. I was working on my PhD in sports psychology at Temple University, and I kind of caught the coaching bug. I wanted some sort of outlet for my stress and kind of a distraction. I'd always been, an athlete. I played collegiate lacrosse and decided just to, do something as an avocation, just kind of pay it forward because the game's given me so much. So I volunteered. For my first year, I volunteered as a youth coach, and that led to an opportunity to be a college assistant coach. And that was really the turning point, because I realized that that's where I felt I could have a broader impact than if I continued down that path of becoming a psychologist and just sitting in an office and listening to other people's problems all day. So I had an opportunity to work for someone who had 42 years of coaching experience. He's probably forgotten more about coaching than most people ever learn. And it was really a great laboratory for me, because he gave me a lot of responsibility and freedom that I might not have gotten somewhere else.
Right.
He's very hands off and trusted his staff to lead and to have our own idea of how to do things, which might be a better idea. And that was really where I decided to make a career change and pursue coaching, as a vocation instead of just an avocation. 2 years later, I got my first head coaching job, realized how unprepared everyone is when they're, for the first time, they become the CEO, so to speak, as opposed to the second in command. And that's really where it all started. And that started in 1996.
And what were you coaching at that time?
I was coaching men's lacrosse.
So you were coaching lacrosse, which is what you come up in. So you've been a player, you played at a high level, you then become a coach, being mentored by an exceptional coach. Now you've moved into the place where you have your own coaching, you're coaching your own team. And as you said, that's a vast difference. And I think this is an important point for our viewers, our listeners to catch, which is the 2IC, the second in command, will often look up at the person in command and go, I could do that so much better.
Sure.
Or and then you're in that role. Tell us about that moment of shock when there's the glory of ta-da, I've made it to coach, and then there's the shock moment of, oh shit, I've made it to coach.
Yeah, I think that the whole lesson behind that and how ill prepared you really are is not in the office or at practice. It's, tie game, fourth quarter, 1 minute left, other team calls timeout, and you're thinking, what do I tell these guys?
Right.
I've never been the person in that situation before where all eyes were on me. Right. I was always kind of in the shadows, eavesdropping and interjecting things. And it wasn't until that happened, and the bullets are flying, so to speak,
sure,
that I realized, okay, well, I need to figure something out. And one of my senior captains looks at me, and he just whispers in my ear. He's like, "You have to talk."
Minor detail.
I was just standing there. He's like, "You got to talk." And so I looked at everyone. And I tried to play it off. I'm like, I was just letting you guys catch your breath. And they're like, okay, great. Well, but what are we going to do? So then, I told them what defense to run. And I don't even remember the outcome of the game. That was so many years ago. But I remember how I felt. And I remember probably how they could see right through the fact that I was trying to fake it.
Sure.
And, the lesson is, I think number one, we're never completely prepared. But number two, if you don't have all the answers, just start asking your people questions.
Right.
I could ask them, hey, what do you guys want to do in this situation? What are you comfortable doing? And, that's something I learned later on. Start to lean on start to lean on my personnel a little more and trust them.
But that's a very interesting point that I'm constantly putting forward to leaders, because a lot of leaders, have been a leader for a very long time and are still approaching leadership in the way that you just said your first coaching day was, which is, I'm supposed to have all the answers. And they're all looking at me for the answers. And I think there's a level of truth in that people are looking at you for the answers, but that doesn't mean you have to provide them. And a great leader doesn't do that. A great leader puts it back in the hands of the other and then really distillates what has been given back to them. So, you have 5 players who speak up about it, and 5 of your executive team who speak up about it. And your job is then to distillate, synthesize, and come up with a solution. But it's not yours. It's the best of from what was given to you. And I think that so often as leaders, we fail in that because we've got this mindset that we're supposed to have all the answers. You clearly moved into that place of, trying to be that guy, and again, totally understandable. When do you think you made the shift? Or did you? Maybe I'm assuming. Maybe you're still telling everybody what to do.
Well, I think I figured it out later rather than sooner,
I'm sure.
Unfortunately. You always look back and, what's kind of the $1 million question? The $1 million question for me, like, what do you know now that you wish you knew back then? And I just realized that when I had some of my more mature teams 5-6 years into my career, I was more comfortable kind of handing the reins over to them. If you had a larger senior and junior class, guys with a little more life experience and emotional intelligence, I was more comfortable doing that. But then I realized at that point, if I don't start to give those opportunities to the younger people on the team, or when I have a younger team collectively, they're never going to get to that point later anyway, or when they do, they'll be ill prepared. So I think a lot of leadership is just letting go.
Yes.
And the kind of the ultimate, I always felt like as coaches at any level, I really wish that you couldn't speak during games or call timeout or talk to the team at halftime. Like, the ultimate sign of how prepared your team is if they can go out and do it themselves without completely without you and your input on game day. And I think it'd be a fascinating study to see, just as a comparison. But I also think that's leadership, in that you allow them to own that experience and they can step back and, regardless of how much you may or may not have done behind the scenes, they're going to feel empowered that they've really done it themselves.
Yeah. So I think that this is the shift between old world leadership and new world leadership. And that we, as I wrote about in my last book, Fiercely Loyal, we cannot lead people the way we led them. It just doesn't work. I mean, even baby boomers who are not even in the leadership position, let's say they're not, they don't even want to be led like that anymore. Yeah. And so, you talked about stepping on to the field and trying to be the guy and trying to know the answers. And then you talked about learning to hand the reins over a little bit. But let's just go back a bit, because you played at a high level of sports yourself. How were you coached?
Well, that's the interesting thing, is I think that we lead the way we were led.
Exactly.
Oftentimes, because that's all we've ever known. Yeah. Unless you took a graduate program or continuing ed credits or whatever it is in leadership development.
Yes.
Like, what you learn is what's kind of thrust upon you. And, when I played for somebody who it was, this is my way or the highway, kind of that old school leadership. And you either did what you were told, or you sat on the bench.
Right.
And nobody wanted to do that. So you just did what you're told. You didn't have a lot of freedom or creativity to express yourself. And, I think lacrosse, hockey, basketball, there are a number of sports, soccer. Those are all sports where, like, there's a large element of creativity, and there should be a lot of freedom for the players to create opportunities. It's a very dynamic, ever-changing game. It's not, it's not football where plays are scripted and get called in from the sidelines. So, I consciously really did try to almost swing the opposite direction of the way I was coached.
Right.
But a lot of that still gets ingrained in you over time, and those are tough habits to break.
As you said, that's the way you were trained, and I think this is where smart leaders go and I thought this was right because it was what I was taught, and it got me to the leadership position, but also having the emotional intelligence and the wherewithal to say, yeah, I thought it was right. It's the way that I was taught. I got to this level. However, this won't work now. What do I need to learn? And when I work with leaders, and very often I'm helping them to retrain their brain, retrain their behaviors away from, as you just said, the way that they were trained to lead, because it just doesn't work anymore. Let's flip into this stadium status. Let's go back into that for a moment. Yep. It might be hard for a CEO sitting in a corner office to understand, but you say that we have to learn to play at the level that athletes and entertainers call stadium status. How can a CEO relate to that? I mean, they can look at it and go, yeah, okay, but it's a nice concept, but I don't know if I get it. It might be the response from many CEOs. Help us to get that corner office CEO to relate to this.
I think the best way that CEOs can relate to stadium status is to understand that they have an awful lot in common with the elite entertainer or the elite athlete, in that in all three of those roles, they're under a microscope. They're performing under the brightest lights and on the biggest stages, and their work day and the results of their work day, their work week, is public for all the world to see. And I think the other area,
because if you're the CEO, there's a good, even if you're the CEO, which people think is the top, it's not, because you've still got the board who are watching everything you did and checking all of your numbers and making sure all of that. And you kind of are the star player, and people may not think of that, but you're actually the star. You're both the captain and the star player. So I guess I see the connection now.
And that accountability falls on you as CEO, not on your board or on ownership. If there's going to be a change, it's not going to be a change in the board or ownership, or in like the sports example, it won't be the front office turning over. It'll be the coaching staff.
Yeah,
I think that, Dov, I think executives would be very well served if they were to approach their job and their role more like they were performers, whether it's an athlete or an entertainer or coach, than as if they're executives. And what I mean by that is, they're on stage, right, and they're delivering a performance, and people need to believe in them, and the people they lead need to trust and be inspired by them, as opposed to simply feeling managed. Micromanaged.
Micromanaged, which is different again. You actually had an experience of examining that world of superstardom, and I think you told me it was particularly country music. Is that right? That you took a look at how those guys are. What did you learn from them?
Yeah, it's fascinating in that as you look at, well, first of all, I don't know if you're a country music fan. I'm a huge country fan because the music speaks to me.
Sure.
It's very philosophical, and mostly it's the lyrics and the song titles, really philosophical, deep songs like I Miss My Ex, but my aim's improving. So miserable since you've been gone, it's like you're still here.
Yeah.
And I'm kidding, obviously, but
not from my point of view.
Reality.
I will fully own that I am a huge music fan, but there is very little country music that actually gets me. I love Johnny Cash. I loved Patsy Cline, but really kind of out of that old school stuff. Not much is going to get me about being drunk, driving your truck because your girlfriend left you and she took your dog too, and she left with your ex-boyfriend and your best bottle of bourbon. That really doesn't do it for me. So help us understand that philosophy.
Sure. Well, the nice thing is, I think if you play that record backwards, you get all that stuff and you get her back.
There you go.
But to downshift into the real reason why I'm fascinated with that genre of music as it relates to us and performance in the corporate world or as entrepreneurs is if you look at across all genres of music, the relationship, the direct relationship between the fan and the artist is closer with the country genre than any other genre of music today.
Well, the great example
there's
of
more
that
of a direct interaction.
Is Taylor Swift, who of course started out as a country artist and became a pop artist. But when I look at her and actually Katy Perry, but I look at those people, the relationship they've built with fans is so vastly different than the hands-off version of, say, the Rolling Stones back from a different age. So tell us about that, because that's a fascinating piece, that relationship piece.
Yeah, you could write a whole book. You could do a whole podcast on like marketing secrets or the marketing genius of Taylor Swift.
Right.
And I had the opportunity as I was writing the book to interview her former manager. Her first manager is Rick Barker. He would be a great guest on your podcast, by the way. I'd be happy to put him in touch with you.
I look forward to that.
And so what Rick had Taylor do when she was young and just getting started was to really interact with her fans on social media and ask them kind of like what the challenges were that they were going through, whether it's a breakup with a guy, navigating kind of the whole social climate at their school, whatever it was. And they would talk to her and they would give her heartfelt, authentic answers. And that became the inspiration for a lot of her songs and her song lyrics. So, the leadership lesson for all of us in something like that is your employees, the people that work for you, they will support a world that they help create if they feel like their input is really valued. And I think that's why she has a very rabid fan base. She also loves to surprise and delight them. She'll send her fans birthday presents, from time to time, handwritten notes.
Yeah.
When she did pre-orders, talk about painting your customer into the picture. When she did pre-orders for one of her early albums, if you pre-ordered it, you could have your face on the cover of it.
Really?
And what I mean by that is like they took very small images and almost pieced them together like a mosaic. So then when people bought the album, they would get out their their magnifying glass and go all around it and try and find their image on it. Brilliant. And it was there. I just put every single one on. But you talk about like really painting your customer into the picture. It's marketing genius. There could be a whole show on Taylor in and of herself, but that's like exhibit A on how to do it. And a lot of that happened when she was country.
What for me is an interesting parallel there is, my last book, as I said, was called Fiercely Loyal, and it was about how millennials don't stick around and they do move on very quickly and how to get them to stay loyal. And one of the things I've said for years is if you don't love your people, someone else will.
Absolutely.
But if you love them, they will love you. And, when you're using this example of Taylor Swift, yes, she had, let's say, millions of fans who were in love with her, and I use that word in a very broad sense, but she loved them back. And that, I think, is what is so different. And very often, leaders in the old school have sat on the throne and sort of been adored by their fans, which are the people who they write checks for. And the question is, are you a fan because I write your paycheck? Or would you be a fan if I didn't? And we've had many great guests on here, and we've talked a lot about this understanding that you've got to have your people so connected to you that they would be there even if you weren't writing the paycheck. They would volunteer to be there. And when you get somebody like Taylor Swift giving you this wonderful, not just marketing, but for me, like I said, I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, but I've actually written about her and saying I think that what she's doing is brilliant. Katy Perry did the same thing. I did a whole piece on Katy Perry as well. This interaction, this willingness to receive from, and as you said, she wrote and asked them their problems and then wrote songs So now I'm listening as a Taylor Swift fan. I'm going, oh, she's talking about me and Billy, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we talk a lot about proof of concept with our businesses. Is this a viable product?
Mm-hmm.
And so often we launch things out into, the world of commerce and wonder, is this going to be successful? Will we have an audience for it? Will people buy it?
Mm-hmm.
She never had to worry about that because the proof of concept took place before she ever cut the album.
Absolutely.
She knew it would resonate because they had already given her that feedback. Imagine if businesses use that same model with their products and services.
So let's move into that from a very practical sense.
Sure.
Not at the level of customer, but at the level of employee. How does the CEO or the C-suite leader or just the leader create that in the people they lead? What would be your practical guidance for them?
Okay, I'm going to tie in two things.
Fabulous.
Garth Brooks and the CEO of a company local to me. I live in Maine, but they're right down the road in Rhode Island here in northern New England. So Garth Brooks, if you recall earlier in his career, before he kind of went into early retirement and came back, used to be famous for the pyrotechnics and flying out on a wire out into the crowd, out into the far reaches of the stadium. And he got a lot of criticism by the media because they thought that was all ego-driven and he was just trying to be a rock star like Kiss, which was his favorite band growing up. And I think it was grossly misunderstood by the media and misportrayed, because what he was really doing was caring, loving, and serving his customers who didn't have a front row seat to his performance. So for a moment in time, he would fly out on a wire to the far reaches of the stadium, and he would play a song or just part of that set to that part of the audience and fly out to the other side. So for a moment in time, some of his worst paying customers had a front row seat for part of that night. And they got to be right close and personal with him. He'd have conversations with them in between songs. There's that level of interaction that you won't get if you go see another artist in a stadium that big. And I think if you're a leader of a medium to large company, that you can employ that same strategy. And the example I would give you is my friend Gary Goldberg, who's a CEO of a company called Clean Brands. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever flown on a commercial airline flight and used either the pillow or the little blanket that's in the overhead bin or that you pay the $50 to get, that's a Clean Brand product, most likely. They're in most of the commercial airlines. And it's a genius product, which is another whole conversation, but it's woven so tightly that bed bugs and mites and things like that can't penetrate it. So it's an incredible product.
Right.
And they've had a ton of success, but what Gary has never lost sight of are the employees and the people kind of in the back row or, the far reaches of the stadium, so to speak. What he does every single day that he's not traveling for business, every day that he's in the office, is middle of the afternoon. He takes a big garbage bin on wheels and he goes around to everybody's office and he empties their waste paper basket.
Wow.
And he does that for two reasons. One, it's servant leadership.
Of course.
And if the CEO who signs his name on the front of your paycheck every 2 weeks is willing to roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty and take out your trash, you'd be hard pressed not to go the extra mile for him when he asks you to do something, and no job should be too small for you. So I think that's part of the genius. But the real intention that he had wasn't necessarily just that example.
Right.
His real intention is to get in front one-on-one, person to person, with each of his employees, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes a day. Hey, what are you working on there? How can I help you? He'll go around to the sales team. What account are you working on right now? How can I help you make a sale right now today? What can I do to kind of grease the wheels for you?
Yeah.
And he said it's been a game changer, and that's like if there's one thing he's not going to give up doing, it's
emptying the trash.
That job, taking the trash out.
Yeah.
And I think I liken it kind of to a physician who goes rounding in the hospital, reading the charts and taking the vitals of each patient. Because, if you're a leader, you need to have your finger on the pulse of everybody in your organization.
But I think I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely fully agree with you. But I still think there is a generation of leaders who, as we talked about, have been brought up with a different school of leadership. And leadership, they in the 90s, they got this idea which was called open door policy. All right. And they went, okay, yeah, all right. So they announced to everybody, you can walk in my office. My door is always open. You don't need an appointment. And then when I'm working with them as a consultant and they talk to me and I say, how's do you have open door policy? And everybody goes, of course we do. Great. How many people come in? Well, it doesn't happen very often. Yeah, because you have an open door, but you have a force field. And they go, what's the force field? And it's the power differentiation. Right, that power difference between the two people, it's one thing to have the door open, it's a whole other to have the courage to walk through that door and say something to the person who's going to write my check. But real open door policy is when you, the leader, step out of your door, which is what you're talking about with Gary, what he does, which is absolutely phenomenal. But he doesn't just step out of the door, and this is what I want people to pay attention to. He doesn't just step out of the door, but he willingly does something that is quote-unquote menial. Something that is, quote unquote, low paying to be at that level. And that in and of itself would lower the barrier, would lower that force field and allow people to even be taken a little off guard and reveal what's truly going on. And this is a vital lesson for so many leaders today. So many leaders. Because we're so damn busy and it's so hard to say, I can't give up 10 minutes. I can't give up 15 minutes. I can't give up half an hour to wander around and empty trash. But that half an hour is such a massive investment.
You can't afford not to, in my book.
Exactly. Now, you were recently...
What I also...
Go on.
What I was going to say, Dov, is the nuance to all of that is, and to, again, tie it back into the stadium, so to speak, is home field advantage is really important in sports.
Talk to us about that.
And when you have home field advantage, that's worth a couple of points on the scoreboard. You have the intimidation factor, your fans, and someone is coming into your building.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do most people feel when they walk into their boss's office?
It ain't home field.
It is a little intimidating. It's someone else's turf.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's that power differential. Gary flips that upside down, and he gives his employees home field advantage. He comes to their office.
Yeah,
So I think that's some of the nuance. Yeah,
it's fabulous. It really is. Now, those who know me, whether that's as my clients or even on here, the people I work with, the companies I work with, the organizations, I'm pretty known for being very authentic and very direct, and I always say compassionately forceful. I mean, I'll hold a lot of compassion for an individual, but I won't put up with any bullshit. And you were recently cited as one of Forbes magazine's top 10 consultants who avoid the BS. I can relate to that. Tell us about what that was like when how did you hear that Forbes magazine had made you one of the top 10 consultants?
Well, John Hall, who did that top 10 list for Forbes, contacted me and wanted to interview me for that. And I'm like, BS? Are you talking bachelor's of science? Because, yeah, I avoided that like hell.
Right.
He's like, no, you know what I mean. And I think that, like, as a consultant, as a coach, that title of consultant gets a bad rap. What's the old saying? Consultant, someone who borrows your watch to tell you what time it is, charges you for the privilege of doing that, and then never returns the watch. So,
it's a horrible title.
So, like, that's why I go by Coach Brew, not Consultant Brew.
Right.
But, I think that when you shoot people straight, you're coming from an authentic place, and you have their best interest at heart, you can cut through all that, and that's simply what I try and do. I try and do that by making sure that my clients know the meter isn't always running all the time.
Right.
It's going to be a results-based project. I'm not going to bill you by the hour. And if I don't get you the mutually agreed upon results, you have a 100% money back guarantee.
Yeah. And I think that's rare in the consulting world, of course. But what was it? I mean, I'm sure that, I understand marketing. I'm sure from a leverage point of view, it's been very good for you to have that. But did you notice an immediate change? Did it change the way that the level of business you were getting? Did it shift that for you?
Well, it shifted that in that what I found was just simply less resistance.
Right.
Because, part of it is, well, I can get my money back if this goes south, which everybody loves a guarantee with any kind of product they get. But the other part of it was, why didn't anyone else that we've interviewed or spoken with, about this potential opportunity, why didn't anybody else offer that? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird. It stands out, and I mean weird in a good way. But the other part of that is, like, holy shit, he must be really confident about what he does if he's willing to put his money where his mouth is like that. Yeah. And yeah, actually I am. I'm really confident. I have great retention with my clients, and we get them results. So I'm comfortable doing that, and I think it just simply you break down some of that resistance on all fronts.
So tell us about, because, that's a very nice accolade. You've done well. You're out in the world. You've got several books out. So one of the things that I get, coming back to this piece around leaders are supposed to know everything and all that nonsense that we got trained with. And one of the things I'm constantly saying to leaders is the only way for you to grow is to admit where you struggle and to reach out, not necessarily to me, although that's obviously available, or even to you, but to reach out to somebody and say, I'm struggling with something. Because everybody will tell you, anybody who's got anything about them at least, that looking back, they realize that where they failed has become a great success for them. It's become, hopefully, it's something they've learned from. Tell us a time when you failed miserably and it just like knocked you on your ass.
Without a doubt, the biggest, most public failure for me was at the end of my coaching career. I spent 12 years as a college coach, championship level coach. In 2002, I took over a team that never had a winning varsity season. We went to the NCAA Final Four. We finished ranked third in the country. Wild success beyond anyone's wildest dreams.
Right.
I had a really great group of senior leaders. They really maximized their potential. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was I became a victim of my own success. That was in 2002. 2004, on June 14th, 2004, my athletic director knocked on my door, walked in my office, and let me know. He said, we're kind of the underdog in our league, underfunded, smaller roster, the whole deal. And he just said, hey, I just got done meeting with the president of the university, and we've come to the conclusion there's only one thing keeping us from winning a national championship in men's lacrosse. So me, being the eternal optimist that I am, I'm thinking there's one of two things. Hey, maybe I'm getting both. Maybe I'm finally getting a full-time assistant, which we'd always been understaffed. And
right.
That was a huge area that's something I've been begging for. And the second was maybe I'm getting that increase in scholarship budget because we have less scholarships than the rest of the teams in our league. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me and he said, and John, that one thing is you. He took out of his coat pocket, I'll never forget it, he took out of his coat pocket an envelope and passed it across the desk to me. And he said, we're making a change. You're fired. And he turned around and he walked out. And the irony of that is June 14th is my birthday. Oh. I was fired on my birthday.
Happy birthday.
But the real irony of happy birthday, you're fired. That's right. The title of my next book. But the real irony of it was this is a guy who's famous for remembering his employees' birthdays, surprise parties, a cake, presents, the whole deal. Looking back, did I get a birthday present that day? No, but the real gift that he gave me with the benefit of hindsight was, that that's probably the greatest gift I ever got, was being fired on my birthday, because I had reached a point where I was burning the candle at both ends. And if I had continued to go down that road and stayed, with that career path, it probably could have cost me my marriage, my relationship with my kids. It's coaching. I think people look at it as like, oh, that's like a sexy, glamorous kind of profession. There's nothing sexy or glamorous about it. It's a grind. It's more of a lifestyle than it is an occupation. It can consume you. And that's exactly what it was doing to me. I was making myself physically sick. I was probably depressed looking back. So I was probably mentally ill as well.
Yeah.
And I was forced out of the profession and forced to take a break. And that allowed me time with our youngest. Our daughter was born 6 months before that season started. And, I barely had an opportunity to get to know her. I was so busy at work. It gave me time with her and time at home with my wife while I had an opportunity. And that buyout wasn't a big check, I might add, because I coached at a small private school.
Right.
But it gave me an opportunity to decide what's next. And what's next needed to be something that was more in line with having balance between work and home. And that what's next became entrepreneurship. So that was really my birthday, sort of my rebirth day. It was the day that I became an entrepreneur.
It's fascinating.
But that was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it was embarrassing and demoralizing and very public.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never met a leader who hasn't gone through something, what I call a knockout punch, where somebody just bam and you go down. I mean, and I think part of being a leader is you get used to getting knocked down, but every now and then you get a knockout punch, and that knockout punch, puts you on the canvas, and invariably, it's not always the case, but very often the case is that the knockout punch came when you thought you were at the top of the game. So here's you doing all the things you just said, having all the success. And and you're even thinking they're coming in to give me more money, to raise the status, blah, blah, blah. And no, we're actually getting rid of you, mate. I think that's the wake-up call that most of us miss. I know when most people who watch the show or listen to the show on a regular basis know my story. I was at the top of my game and I fell off a mountain and I got smashed to pieces while I was free climbing. Yeah. But the next 9 months, I just kept talking about coming back. That was, my ego was so strong that it was like, well, I'm just coming back. No, there is no back. There is no back, and it's a fork in the road. People say to me, well, that must have really changed you. No, it didn't change me. It made the ego bigger. It's the things that happened 9 months later that actually changed me, where I went, oh, I can't do this shit anymore. I actually have to do something different and better. And so, like what you're saying about this guy actually gave you a gift, but a gift often comes disguised as a slap or a boot in the head or a knockout punch that will make you re-examine. And it's a really interesting thing. So what was, you got into the entrepreneur world. Like I said, now you've been cited by Forbes magazine, you've got several books, you work with companies and organizations. What would you say was the turning point in your business?
I think the turning point in my business was when I stopped listening to so-called experts, and people would tell me earlier in my career, like, there's certain best practices you need to follow, because, I kind of learned the hard way, that best practices, there's nothing really best about them because they're common practices.
Yes.
And you end up fitting in, and you end up fitting into this little box with everybody else, and you get commoditized, and no one can tell you apart as opposed to standing out.
Right.
And, when a couple of years into my coaching career, my consulting career, I had hired a marketing person for my book launch and my first book. And she just kind of, when we first met, she just kind of like eyed me up and kind of just looked at me up and down. And she's like, we got to change this. This is no. You really shouldn't be wearing the jeans and the cowboy boots and like the wacky shirt. Like, we're going to get some headshots and some photographs taken for you with the book. You need to be in a suit with a tie, and the marketing collateral ended up looking like everybody else's. I put the suit on. I followed the quote expert advice and the best practices, and I ended up having to compete on price with everybody else. I didn't stand out. I was in a sea of sameness, and that's no way to do business.
No.
And that wasn't my authentic self. My authentic self, really, regardless of where I am, I'm going to have my cowboy boots on and my jeans and, just like a button-up shirt typically. And what you see is what you get with me.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be something I wasn't. Yeah, I was trying to be something I wasn't. And, to kind of loop back to Stadium Status, with that, what really resonates with people isn't necessarily all your successes. It's admitting your failures and being human and making sure that they know you're on their level. Shortly before the book came out, I went to see Brett Eldredge and Thomas Rhett, who are two country artists, and the irony of this story is the name of their tour was the Suits and Boots Tour. Oh. Believe it or not. And Eldredge was on stage. This is in Bangor, Maine, in this big arena. This is a stadium show.
Right.
And, typically you go see any artist in any genre, and they travel from tour stop to tour stop to tour stop to tour stop, and the show is typically cookie cutter.
Yep.
And they try and manufacture something to make, rapport with the audience.
Of course.
Like, hey, this is my favorite place to play. I love coming here. And everyone's like, oh, yeah. Well, so Eldredge says, this is absolutely my favorite place to play. So I'm thinking, this guy says that everywhere,
of course.
Yeah. But then he proceeded to explain why. He said, when I first came here 4 years ago, I opened up for Tim McGraw. It was my first stadium show. I was so nervous, I forgot the lyrics to my own song. And he said, I'll never forget your response. As I went mute and my band is playing, you guys carried me. You all started to sing along and sing the lyrics for me until I got back, I got my footing back and I remembered what I was supposed to say next. And I'm just sitting there thinking, here's a guy he's on a stage, but he's not on a pedestal. He's human. He's relating to us. So he thanked the whole audience and was genuine and authentic, admitting a failure and explaining why it legitimately was his favorite place to play. And it's the first time I've been to a ton of shows, first time I've ever seen an artist get a standing ovation between songs.
Yeah.
You get a standing ovation when you come in the arena. You get a standing ovation when you play your best song and people get up and sing along. You don't get one in between songs where you just chit-chat in the crowd. Right. He got one because he's being his authentic self, admitting his mistakes, and just being human. And I found that when I started to be myself, that's when the results came. So it's just, what a lesson.
Yeah, I mean, that's very powerful, particularly from that artist, in that, when we look at that as a metaphor, is that you're there to lead. Here's this artist leading his audience, but also fully owning his failure, fully owning where he fell down, and owning that you carried me. I mean, how beautiful is that? Isn't that, we're all leaders, we're out there and we're doing our thing, but, it's one of the things I say to people all the time. My work is a little different than most people's. It gets to what we call soul purpose. It finds out what's at that deepest possible level that drives an individual to lead. But that humanity side is so vital in that. It's not about being better than. It's saying how can I help you as well as you help me. It's reciprocity. It's not, it's getting off, as you said, it's getting off the pedestal. My work is about finding and helping organizations find the sole purpose of their leadership, of their business. And for me, that's about what is it that drives them at that unconscious and conscious level, and to reconcile those disenfranchised and compartmentalized parts of ourselves to come back to whole. Because my belief is that you're already whole, you're already magnificent, but you've just forgotten bits of yourself. They've got compartmentalized.
Sure.
And for me, that's at the base of leadership, is what drives us to lead. What do you see as the, if you will, the soul of leadership? If you had to sort of inscribe it, what would you say is the soul of leadership for you?
The soul of leadership is making sure that you're congruent. And that's where I didn't have a whole lot of congruence in my coaching career. I want to loop back to my story of failure when I got fired on my birthday. It was kind of reflecting from there. I had no balance. I was burning the candle at both ends. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping well. I slept in the office sometimes, burning the midnight oil. And I think, oftentimes we think we need to work harder and do more. Like more is better and more isn't better. And I got to thinking, because I had plenty of time immediately after that to just reflect.
I guess.
And I got to thinking, we lost in the NCAA Final Four to the eventual national champions by 4 goals. And all the while, I was a lousy example for my players in terms of balance, not sleeping well, not eating well, not taking care of myself and exercising. So I was thinking, I would like to think that my example, had I led a little more congruently, because you tell them you got to eat right, you got to sleep right, you got to take care of your body. But if I'm not making that example, I'd like to think that example might have been worth 4 goals in the NCAA Final Four. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I really feel like, the heart of leadership is congruence, walking your talk.
Yeah.
Because, people can see right through that. And that's a lesson I learned. And I think it's interesting, no small coincidence that, the more I share that story of how I had no balance and what I learned from experiencing that knockout punch, was more and more executives are approaching me. Hey, that really resonated with me as you're sharing that story and describing yourself. I'm thinking of he's talking about me.
Of course.
So I have a lot of people who come to me now wanting to try and find balance.
Yeah.
Am I the perfect model of balance? No, but I've seen the worst of it, and I know how to avoid that now.
Yeah.
So just trying to maintain that congruence, I think it will help every leader, with their people, because it's a heart-centered approach. You're leading from the right place when
Absolutely.
you do that.
Now, in everything you've shared today about leadership, about yourself, and particularly about Stadium Status, what would you say is the most practical thing a C-suite or even a high-level entrepreneur can do with what you've been sharing today? What is the most practical thing that they can walk away and go, I listened to John, and this is really what I'm going to go away and do?
I'm going to ask you a question in response to that. Practical for themselves or practical for their people to apply?
Well, practical for them to lead.
Okay. My whole belief behind Stadium Status is it has to be a mentality before it's a reality.
Mm-hmm.
And you are, in fact, already Stadium Status. It's not something you necessarily achieve, although that's sort of what the quote textbook definition would tell you.
Yes.
It's really who you're becoming. So what matters more is the journey to the stadium, not quote arriving at the stadium.
Right. That's vital. Well, John, it's been a pleasure having you here. I want to thank you for joining us. It's been fabulous having you on the show. I really appreciate it. I'd love it if you would tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you, about your book, and about your speaking, all those kinds of things.
Sure. Just go to coachbru.com. That's coachbru.com. Or if you want to spell it wrong, it'll still get you there. You go to coachbrew.com.
So coachbru.com, COACHBRU.com. And of course, we will put that in the show notes for everybody so that they can find you. It's been a pleasure having you here, my friend. Appreciate it very much. Hope you'll stay with us to the end. And I want to thank you, dear listener, for tuning in, for being part of today. And again, as always, I remind you, don't just listen to the show, go do something with it. Reach out to us. Find John on social media. What's your Twitter handle, John? Tell them how people can find you on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook or wherever.
Everything literally is at Coach Brew, or just add Coach Brew to the end of the URL and that'll get you to me.
Fabulous. So get yourself over to iTunes and listen to this show. Find John, find him on Twitter, find him on all the other different places. And you know, one thing I would always say to you is reach out to my guest and tell them what you got out of the show. You know, they gave their time to be with you today. Value that, appreciate that, respect that, and be grateful for it. Let John know what you got out of today. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies can be somewhat counterintuitive, in the fastest growing companies often hit their high point and realize that they're spending an absolute fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, and also having them leave them at an alarmingly high rate. If you're sick of investing in training, developing your talent, only to have them leave before you get a return on your investment, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets of your organization by tapping into what we call your sole purpose, and then we can reduce that turnover rate by as much as 80%. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Remember to get yourself over to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com to get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. That's valued at $197. So matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about where you are actually holding yourself back from stadium status. What would it take to get there? Until next time, this is Dov Baron, and I am out.